Hello there, Drew Hanish with Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. Today we're going to go to one of my old standbys that I haven't been standing by very much of late. It is Rittenhouse Rye. The reason why I say I haven't been standing by it is because when I first got into drinking bourbon, this was the first rye that I bought, and I bought a bottle of it and I ran right through it. I was like, wow, that's really good. And then I ended up getting a second bottle, and I will say that I probably got about that far down, and then it's just been a slow crawl on this because I have so much other whiskey that I don't tend to come back to this one. And so today I'm going to get an opportunity to go back and retaste it and see if I can get myself back on board with it, because I became a big fan of rye whiskey, and I have this opinion that Rittenhouse Rye is really just a gateway rye to get you from bourbon into understanding some notes and character of rye whiskey. But is it still an everyday drinker? Is it something that I really should be paying more attention to, and it should be pulled off my shelf a little bit more than I have been pulling it lately? Now this one just gets over the line to be considered a rye whiskey. It is 51% rye grain. It's 37% corn, 12% malted barley. And that's the reason why I say this truly, to me, is a bourbon gateway into rye, because there's still a lot of corn in this mash bill. And one of the things that happens with rye and corn is that sometimes it intensifies the rye a little bit too much, and you start getting that burn on the finish. Now, I don't really recall that with Rittenhouse, but it has been a while since I have tasted it. 50% alcohol by volume. It's part of the Bottled-in-Bond series. A little bit of history on it. If we read the back of the bottle, Rittenhouse Straight Rye Whiskey is a storied Pennsylvania-style rye whose heritage commemorates Philadelphia's famous Rittenhouse Square. Now, as somebody who is a mythbuster and who wants to try to get history right beyond what marketing departments want us to believe is true history, I call bullshit on this description. It is so marketing. Storied Pennsylvania-style rye. This is a storied Pennsylvania rye. Okay, so what that is telling me is that Rittenhouse Rye is a rye whiskey that has been around for generations. I don't know when Rittenhouse Rye first hit the shelves. I'm going to have to do some research on that. But it's not a brand, as far as I know, that is storied and goes way back. But then if we really get in and read the vernacular on it, we're into like storied Pennsylvania style rye. Oh, okay, so it's not the brand that's storied, it's the style of rye that's in here that is historic. Well, I don't even know if that's accurate, because we pay a lot more attention to mash bills these days than they did back in 1825 or whenever they may have been, producing these, or in the 1700s when they were producing these ryes. They basically used whatever they had available. So mash bills might shift from time to time. And corn was more prevalent probably in Maryland than it was in Pennsylvania. So my assumption would be that we were probably getting much higher levels of rye in Pennsylvania style ryes way back then, rather than being 51%, just enough to be able to be considered a rye whiskey. So you guys know I have a love-hate relationship with Heaven Hill. Some great products that they put out. I'm not a fan of their marketing attempts to embellish or create history. That kind of annoys me, but it is what it is. Let's get back to the juice, because that is where Heaven Hill really wins. And so we're going with, again, this concept that is this a rye you could drink as a rye lover? Or is this a gateway rye just to bridge you from bourbon into the world of rye. So let's do a nosing and tasting. It's got a very fragrant nose to it. It does have those bourbon characteristics. The caramel, the vanilla come in there. A heavy dose of oak comes in. It's almost more like almost a sawmill kind of a wood note that I get on this, along with that sweet, herbally rye character that I crave more of. There's actually a little leather note in this as well. I get a little cinnamon. Not necessarily like a baking spice cinnamon, but more of a heat cinnamon coming in on that. Cheers. Wow. That caramel comes right through. Got a cola note coming in. Interesting. So, bit of leather there, but sweetness from the rye coming in. A little lemony character. Really get a sense of the grain there. Slight bit of char on the end. Really nice mouthfeel. It's got a medium mouthfeel to it, edging on getting a little bit more into maybe the milky category. That hint of lemon really kind of holds through into the finish and is really nice. And the char sitting there. This is a lot more complex than I remember it. Of course, my palate has changed a lot over time. I'm enjoying what I'm getting out of this in terms of the rye notes that I'm pulling in. I still sense this is more of a bourbon, but it doesn't have, it's got like a little burnt toffee kind of a note that lays on the very back of the palate on this. Probably the only thing that kind of stands out to me as a bourbon character that would be a negative for me. That, that to me is kind of like, okay, not so in love with it from that aspect. But that's such a small, insignificant part. It's almost not worth even mentioning, because this is such a pleasant drinker from front to back. It has really great flavors to it. I think for the rye fan, you're probably going to find this to be lacking in terms of an intensity in the amount of earthiness or herbaliness in the rye. But the rye is there, and it's pleasant. Like I say, I think I realize why I really enjoyed this whiskey so much in the past. It lays so nice and so flavorful on the palate. It's just impressive. It's just impressive to me. So the nose is probably where the bourbon character shows up the most on this. Maybe a little bit of that char coming through and overwhelming the rye notes a bit on the nose, but on the palate and into the finish, I think it's just a nice, soft rye influence that's coming in, which, hey, if you want to step away from bourbon and start weaving your way into rye whiskey, I do think this is a good way to go. Nice, easy drinker. You know what? I gotta start drinking this a little bit more again. It's really, really good. I'm gonna put this in the excellent category. I think this is an excellent whiskey, one that I need to pay more attention to, because the complexity in this thing is a whole lot more than I remember. But I think, again, that's because my palate has evolved over time. So It worked great as a gateway to get into rye when my palate was less refined, and now as my palate is refining, I'm starting to find the complexity in this whiskey. So it's multi-dimensional, which is what I look for in a whiskey that I like to recommend. So, hey, 2 thumbs up for Rittenhouse Rye. And what do you guys think about it? Have you had Rittenhouse Rye? What's your opinion on it? This makes me want to go get a bottle of Pikesville now, because that's the higher proof version, just to see what the heck that is all about versus this bottled in bond Rittenhouse Rye. But hey, if you enjoyed this video, give me a like and subscribe if you want to watch more of these if you haven't already. Until next time, cheers and Sanjava. It's low. I'm going to have to go get another bottle soon.